This may come out a little late, but let's take a minute to honor our veterans. Now just wait a minute and sit right there as I tell you how I became the host of a series called Let's Blending. First, a couple of tips. This here is a proportional editing object mode. If two objects share a similar space, when you move one, it moves another. Click it to turn it off. It's annoying. In fact, I'm not sure if I can show you. Yes, see? See? Right there. Starts moving, loads moving. It's a pain in the butt, and it's usually on, and you never know. Well, it starts parented to that box. But you never know when. For any of you that this takes by surprise, now you know to find that little round button there, shortcut O, and click it to turn it off. That's caused me no end of grief for quite a while. Another thing is, remember, if you have logic bricks set up to remove a scene, like an inventory scene, and that's the only scene you have open, it will exit the Blender game engine. And yes, I know this from experience. Okay, first off, this. Let's get the little stuff done real quick. What I did with this was I pretty much just gave it an animation to get bigger and smaller. I think it's about 20 frames. Yep. And I have action, loop, end, start, and end. We've got a mouse over sensor and an action actuator that just loops from frame 0 to frame 20. We also have a left button mouse sensor with the mouse over, and it sets the scene scene. It adds the background scene sky, and it adds the overlay scene inventory. Now I was going to create a heads up display, but I'd have to copy everything from, link everything from inventory to my heads up display. That seemed redundant. So I kind of combined the two. I'll show you later. Another thing to notice, that when you're using, I think it's logic.getSceneList to get a list of the scenes, the scenes are in order. So the scene that you set is usually in the center somewhere, but background scenes are usually the first things in the list, then the current scene, and then the overlay scene. So instead of using for I in list scenes, if string I equals the scene you're looking for, do something, you can just say scene list 0 equals the background sky scene. A lot of people use this to get the active camera in the sky scene so that they can rotate it with the player's camera. And since the sky scene is a background scene, it should always be at index 0, which is fantastic. You don't have to do a loop. Also, you can't use sky list and then put the string of the scene you can't use scene list and use the string of the scene you want in brackets, because you've got a list of scenes, not a list of strings. It gets confusing. So all you need to know is that background scenes are usually at index 0. That should help you a bit. Now basically when you click on that start, it starts the game. Now let's remove that because I don't need to be adding 2 background scenes. Okay. And as you notice, the camera moves around the skybox. And yes, I know that's a very bad skybox. Good grief, just select the camera already. Oh, I know I had that. That's to pick up items. Okay. There's mouse movement. Does 2 things. It controls the sky camera and it controls the mouse camera. And on the player we have pretty much the same thing. We have our keyboard to control the stop movement, an always sensor to a motion actuator, and mouse movement to control the stop mouse rotation, which also goes to the motion actuator. So let's look over our controls Python script. . our movement, we're passing it the controller, we're getting the owner, we're getting the current keyboard sensor. Now the true keyboard sensor, for all keys, it'll get all keys that you press. So down here there are the key codes for the keys. Basically you'd print keys.events to get the event codes. Move equals the motion actuator, and we're setting X, Y, and Z to 0. Then key W equals 119.2, 115.2 for key S, and so on and so forth. This 2 means that it's being held down. We've got 1, 2, and 3, I believe. And I think 0 is if it's not being pressed at all. I think 1's for a quick press, 2's being held down, and 3 is when it's coming up. If key W and key events, move Y equals 0.5. If key S, else if key S and key events move Y equals negative 0.5. This is for forward and back. And then A and D has left and right. Move X has to be negative for key A, and it has to be positive for key D. And then we just pass move X, Y, and Z to our motion actuator's directional location. That way you can have not only forward, back, left, and right strafing motion, but diagonal strafing motion. Otherwise, if you're trying to do them one at a time, it'll only work with them one at a time. Mouse rotation, mouse cam, and sky cam. Mouse rotation rotates the player character, and mouse cam rotates the camera. Now with the camera, I have an animation going all the way up and all the way down. What I did was I placed the downward pointing keyframe and put it on frame 0. Then the middle one, the forward facing frame, on frame 90 I believe, and the upward facing one on frame 180. Then I grabbed all the keyframes, I believe it's still Control A, and I grabbed them and I moved them, because while you cannot set a keyframe on, while you cannot set a keyframe on a negative frame number, you can move it to a negative frame number. So downward pointing was negative 90, forward facing was 0, and upward facing was positive 90. That'll come in handy later. We get the controller, we get the owner, we get the mouse movement sensor. It's pretty much just any mouse movement. You do not want a mouse over sensor, because you might not have anything to mouse over. And we get the movement, the motion actuator. The mouse position equals logic dot the mouse position. And then we set it to 0.5, which should point it straight in the center of the screen. Now when we pause this current scene, this will no longer be in effect, but currently it puts the cursor directly in the center of the screen. Brought Z equals mouse position 0 minus 0.5, because it's in the center, and we're getting whatever excess we have outside of that when we move the mouse, and we're turning it into a rotation. But we're rounding our rotation Z, which is the mouse position 0, to 2 decimal places, and we're making our rotation Z negative. That way we flip the mouse movement so that it's correct. and we're rounding it to 2 decimal places, so we have a little bit of dead space. You don't want it to lazy eye, because it will kind of rove around a bit. Our mouse camera, we send it the controller, and this here is on the camera, while this is on the player's bounding box, or whatever part of the player is controlling movement and rotation. We get the control, we pass the controller, we get the owner, we get the mouse movement sensor. I've renamed it to move because we currently have one mouse over sensor for picking items up and another mouse over or a mouse movement sensor for the mouse look. Now I know that there is a mouse look actuator, but trust me, I don't want to fiddle with that. They could have modified the movement, the movement or the motion actuator to take variables, and then modified the mouse movement actuator to send the mouse position to a property that would be gotten by the movement property and maybe rounded up to a couple decimal places. They could have just added to two sensors, to a sensor and an actuator, rather than just creating a completely new actuator, because it's kind of confusing. Now the mouse position equals logic mouse position. And just like above, we set it to the center, and we get mouse position 1 instead of 2, minus 0.5 times 30. Now, we have a property on the owner for our current rotation frame, and we have a sensor set up that's always picking up. Well, we have an always sensor that goes to an animation actuator, or an action actuator, which currently has our mouse look animation, which is based on our rotational frame property. And making sure that if the rotational frame is greater than 90, it should equal 90. Less than negative 90, it should equal negative 90. Because some troll, looking for glitches, is going to keep moving his mouse to see if he has to move his mouse a whole lot back downward to get the camera to move downward. In other words, you don't want the frame to constantly being added or subtracted to past its frame limits. This means that people who accidentally rotate their camera too high will have to rotate it back, and that's boring. If you don't have these if statements, you'll figure out what I'm talking about when you try it. And basically the sky camera, we pass the controller, get the owner, we get the scene list by logic.get scene list. In fact, we don't really need the owner. I just had that just in case. And underlay scenes are always first, which I think is fantastic. We get scene list 0, we get the active camera, we get its orientation, and we set it to our current camera's orientation. This is also on the camera, and it's put on an always sensor. that's enough for now. I'll go over what I've done to the inventory in the next one.